Hey, Kate, can I tell you what I ate last night?
Yeah.
I ate this amazing hash. I got it from a friend of mine who lives in Chicago. Do you know her? Her name's Kate.
I love her.
She's pretty awesome. So Kate gave me this recipe. I literally called Kate and said, Kate, these are the things I have in my fridge. Tell me what to make.
It was fun. It was like Chopped.
And she did.
Yeah.
Totally. Oh, it totally is like Chopped. You like Chopped?
I do. It was great.
So I had cauliflower. I grilled the cauliflower. I mixed that with sweet potato, onion, garlic, tomato, poblano pepper, salt, pepper, and spinach.
Mm-hmm.
I mixed all that together, and then I made 2 soft eggs over easy, right on top of them, stirred it all together. Oh boy, was that good.
Mm-hmm.
Super healthy too.
Super healthy. And for anyone that watches Chopped, you're going to be like, well, that was the easiest basket ever, which of course it was. All of those things lent itself to a perfect hash that you can put an egg on, and it's awesome. So next time he'll give me something more challenging.
Pig's feet.
They have pig's feet on Chopped. They just had that on one that I saw.
I'm sure they do. What don't they have?
Exactly. I actually also had eggs last night. I made a frittata, which is one of my go-tos. So I put in some cut up veggies. Usually I have some already ready. If I'm feeling less great, I'll do potatoes. Like if I have potatoes in the house, I'll put a potato in. But normally I steer away from the potatoes and I saute some veggies, and then I whip up eggs with some milk and some hot pepper flake and salt and pepper. And sometimes I'll put another seasoning in there, like an Italian seasoning, but sometimes I won't. And then you just pour it over the sauteed veggies and cover it and cook it over low on the stove. Oh. And then as it's getting ready to be done, I put some blue cheese on top to melt and maybe some scallions. And it is so good and super healthy and really easy.
And blue cheese and eggs always solves a lot of problems.
I know. And blue cheese is actually the only cheese I can keep in the house because I can use it as a seasoning like that. I just sprinkle a little bit over top instead of just sitting there and just mowing on it. Because any other cheese, it's all over.
Is mowing an actual term?
That is the technical term for standing there.
For what you do.
Exactly. And just
whatever it is, you do in Chicago.
That's right. We mow in Chicago. Chicago's a mowing town, actually. It's true.
God, why don't we live in the same city, for the love of God?
Might be good that we don't.
Hello, and welcome to the second installment of our 2-part series on the addictive aspects of food. I'm Rick Fiore.
And I'm Kate DeVore, and this is our ongoing conversation about food, health, weight management, and our endeavor to be and stay healthy in a really tasty world.
In this episode, we're going to talk about what makes food addictive, why cheese is the new crack, and adjusting your hedonistic set point. One of the other things I thought about is when I was really thinking about particularly the types of desserts I like, and, this whole idea of, do I really prefer, things that are so intensely strong and sweet, or do I, it's sort of what you said earlier, the one that has the perfect combination of the sugar, the fat, and the salt. So it brought me to this whole idea of like, when when you eat cheesecakes, like sometimes when I eat cheesecake or I eat Alfredo sauce, I have to stop because they're so rich that I just can't eat it all. Right. So it led me to this whole theory that I found that it's called sensory specific satiety. This is this whole idea that food companies know that there's a tendency for big, distinct flavors to overwhelm the brain, right? Which responds by depressing your desire to have more. So if you have a big, overwhelming flavor, it's going to shut you down your desire to have more. So they actually don't like to create products like that because they don't want to have something that's so intense and so overwhelming that it makes you not want more. So they're always looking for this like set point, which you were talking about earlier, the perfect combination between all 3 elements that gives you just a hit, that gives you just enough of that overwhelming taste that makes you want more. But then it's like they stop. They don't go farther. Isn't that fascinating?
Yes. So they purposefully make it so that satiety point isn't hit. So you don't feel satisfied. That's what you're saying?
Exactly.
Oh,
they just
that's
give
so
you
smart of them. And evil genius.
It's this idea that it just piques, right? It just piques your interest. It piques your taste buds just enough to be sort of like, hey, come have this, have more, rather than overriding like a single flavor that tells the brain enough. Because I always wondered, like, I can never eat an entire piece of cheesecake, I can never eat an entire dish of Alfredo sauce when it's made really well. you know?
Yeah. And sometimes if I'm feeling bingy and I think about what I have in the fridge and I have something in there that's actually nutritious, I'm like, well, I can't eat that because then I'll be full. But so, like, I can't eat real food.
Totally, yeah.
Totally. And on the food shows, when they judge the cooking shows, one of the things that they always say that's praise for a dish is that you take a bite and you get these flavors and textures and it makes you want to go back for another bite. And that's one of the things that qualifies it as a successful dish is that it makes you want more.
Oh, I love that idea. It's a really beautiful idea.
I know. And again, that's partly the pleasure elements of the texture and the flavor, which is pleasurable, and then partly these addictive elements. So there's been an article going around lately that people have been talking about a lot in my circle. Have they been talking about it in yours? About this article that came out that said cheese is as addictive as crack?
Yes, totally. It's the new crack, yeah.
Yeah, but that cheese is literally as addictive as crack. And on the Yale food addiction scale, pizza is at the very top. Now, I've looked at a bunch of different scales where people rate addictive foods, and they all actually vary. They all mostly contain the same things. And in a second, we'll talk about what those are. But this one says the pizza. And the reason is that because cheese has a thing in it, a protein, I think it's a protein. It's an element in cheese called casein. And it releases opiates called casomorphins, which affect what? The dopamine receptors. So... Casomorphin, and of course morphin reminds me of morphine, right? So it feels like it's got to be related to that somehow. So I think what we need to open is a casomethadone clinic and figure out what the way to like scale back is. I don't know if that would be like 2% cheese or soy cheese or something that's pretending to be cheese but doesn't give you the rush of real cheese. That's my new theory.
Kate, that's what I like about you. You're so forward thinking. A casomethadone clinic. That's the way to go.
Casomethadone. That's everyone. Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Totally.
Kate and Rick's.
So the Kate and Rick's Casomethadone Clinic and Grill. Right.
And grill.
Totally.
That's crazy.
Generally speaking, the things that I find on the lists of addictive foods are white bread, donuts, pasta, cake, chips, cookies, chocolate, French fries, candy, pizza, and ice cream. Those are some of our major ones. Now, ice cream. I want to talk about ice cream for a second here, but because apparently there's this other really fascinating concept that came up to me within this research when it came to ice cream, and what the researcher described it as, it shifts our brain's hedonistic set point, meaning the point at which we perceive pleasure. So hedonism pertaining to pleasure, which is a big part of my relationship to food, is all about hedonism. I am a hedonist, front and center. And so a big part of it to me is just enjoyment and pleasure up until the point at which it becomes an addictive thing, which I seem to move in and out of these days, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But so therefore, when your hedonistic set point is reset by eating things like ice cream, that means that things like watermelon, which in another context you might perceive as being really sweet and delicious and satisfying, is no longer satisfying. So that's something that happens when we do this. And I think that's why, for me, I tend to go on these cleanses to reset myself, and I have to kind of eliminate everything good. It's how I see it when I start the cleanse. It's not how I see it when I finish it. But when I start it, it's like, stop eating everything you like, which isn't true at all. And we'll talk more about that in future episodes of how these cleanses work, because they can be super helpful. But I think that's what I'm doing, is resetting my hedonistic set point and reassessing what's really pleasurable. Because I can have times where I eat an apple and I'm like, this really is as good as any candy, you know? And then other times where I'm like, are you kidding me? An apple? You know?
Totally, because it is interesting when then sometimes when you actually bite into a fresh piece of fruit, you're like, oh my God, this is so good. But half the time I'm not able to sense that. I can't pay attention to how good it feels because of everything else that I'm used to. It's so amazing.
We've gotten so much better with fruit. If I recall correctly, you used to really not care for it terribly at all.
Never. You're right, actually. Good memory, Katie.
I pay attention.
I never used to. I never used to like it. It became a real effort to start to include fruit in my diet. And now, look at me. I'm making smoothies. It was really the same, too, with salad. I really had no interest in salads. And even today, like, it takes, when I eat a salad, I have that whole dynamic that you just talked about. There's some times where I just can't taste it. It doesn't feel good. And it's a little bit sad because I know in the past how good salads have tasted and what they do to me. So that's so interesting.
Well, for
I'm a
you,
hedonist, too.
as long as you make salad without too much lettuce, you're happier.
Yeah,
I
totally.
think.
I like more components than lettuce. Yeah, I like more stuff going on.
And if
in
you're
my
allowed
salad.
to eat it with your fingers, you like it better.
It's sort of true.
I remember that.
Kate, you're revealing too much about me.
Sorry. Hey, Rick, what are you into these days?
This is super simple, but I'm into literally carrying around a mixture of seeds, from pumpkin seeds to sunflower seeds to chia seeds, and just having them in my bag, having them in my house, because they're my go-to snack nowadays. They're super satisfying, super easy, and super accessible.
Great idea.
That also goes back to a little bit to what they call, when I was talking earlier about this whole idea that these companies are looking for the perfect combination of the sugar, the salt, and the fat. They refer to it as the bliss point, where someone gets blissed out, and it is that whole thing of they want more. And unfortunately, they're just trying to give them more of that stuff that, oh God, makes us want to kill ourselves. It's so damn tasty.
Totally. I have a friend who smokes a fair amount of pot, and he had this revelation recently that he was like, I realized that after a few puffs, I'm already high and I'm not going to get any higher by continuing to smoke more. But he was hanging around with people that would just sit around for hours and hours and smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke. And he was like, I realized that nobody was getting any higher. There was no reason to do it. And it feels like there's some analogy there, right? Like it's like once you have the bite of the thing you crave, that's it. You have achieved your Mecca. You've achieved your thing for that moment, your Valhalla or whatever it is. And then by continuing to indulge, it doesn't actually make the experience any better. It only potentially makes it worse.
Makes it worse. Well, it loses potential the far more you eat of it, right? For me, the more I eat of it, the less pleasure I get as I go along, which I actually think relates back to what we were talking about earlier, where I literally feel like I don't, where I derive more pleasure from looking at food and seeing it prepared and seeing it in the supermarket. Like once I start to have the bite, it goes down and down and down. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So talking about addiction itself now, this is the final kind of fascinating point that came to me during this is I took one of those addiction quizzes. And
those damn addiction quizzes.
I know you're going to share some more addiction quiz info with us in a moment, but what I'm going to say is I actually took one. It was the Yale Food Addiction Scale. And I took it from two perspectives. I took it from where I am right now. And then I went back and re-answered the questions from the perspective of where I was before I lost all this weight several years ago. Because as I've mentioned before on this podcast, I have been heavy my whole life and for the most part didn't really try to do much about that. And I didn't feel like I had any sort of addictive relationship to food at that point. I was just eating it because I was a hedonist and I didn't care. And I never really made much of an attempt to change it. In the last few years, I have, and so my relationship with the whole weight gain, weight loss, food has changed. So what was extraordinarily interesting to me was that when I took it from my perspective of where I am right now, I do show an addiction to food. When I took it from the relationship of where I was before I lost 75 pounds several years ago on my 5'2" frame, I wasn't. Before I lost that, when I was that heavy, I answered the questions in the way that I would have answered them then, truthfully, and it did not show an addictive relationship to food. So I find that really fascinating. And I think one of the things that I learned is that women tend to get more addicted to food than men because women tend to restrict and then binge. And that apparently sensitizes the brain to an addictive process and makes it more likely for you to have a psychologically unhealthy relationship with a substance if you restrict and binge. So before, I wasn't ever really restricting in any meaningful way.
Right.
And now, the downside is I do these cleanses and then I go off the wagon big time and then I cleanse. And so I do tend to restrict and binge, which is the absolute worst case scenario. So that's really my take home point from this is I am desperate to figure out a path of moderation so that it's not either all or nothing,
Yeah. I think that's always been one of the things that we've always talked about before because you have always liked cleanses and they work really well for you. They really do.
They do.
And, and they've never really particularly worked too well for me.
Well, that's probably good.
I guess. I don't know, though, because sometimes when I listen to you do the cleanses, I'm always like, I often feel like I have this complete lack of drive because I do feel like I get why cleanses are good or work, and I get why they make you feel good, and particularly in relation to that whole idea of like just cleansing things out and sort of being able to reset your taste buds. Like that makes a lot of sense to me, and I want to be able to do it, but I ultimately never feel strong enough to do it. So it takes a lot of fire to be able to do those cleanses. It takes a lot of effort. And that's really good. So
it does.
The question is, like,
the actual only real challenge, as we've discussed, is the social element, because for the most part, it's very difficult to eat in restaurants when I'm eating super, super healthy. And I could go and spend $12 for a plate of lettuce, but I don't generally want to. And it's no fun. What's the point of eating out if you're going to eat something that you could make way better at home for less money and more satisfying and more nutrition and, all that?
Yeah, that's the absolute truth. And that's really true for me too, because, I don't eat meat. And so a lot of the vegetable dishes that I pay for at restaurants, I'm always so disappointed that I've just chunked down a large pile of cash for basically portobello mushroom burger that has no flavor.
Exactly. And God knows it's super easy to find a veggie dish in a restaurant that doesn't include pasta. Or rice.
Super easy. One of my favorite things. I was going to say earlier when we were talking about those foods, did you know that pizza is the most popular dish in America? That there was more pizza made in this entire country than any other dish, which explains everything you're talking about.
I didn't know that, but it's somehow not surprising. Hey, Rick, did you know that if you add citrus to green tea, it stabilizes what's called its catechin content, which boosts the antioxidants that survive in the digestive tract 13-fold?
No. Mm-hmm. So what I did is online there's all these addiction quizzes that you can take.
Yes.
And I was taking them and I thought, well, I'm going to put together a compilation of my favorite questions.
All right.
Now, I don't necessarily want you to answer them, but I just think some of them are sort of interesting, some of them are sort of funny, and then a lot of them just make me sad.
Okay. All right. I'm ready.
So I'm just going to give you a couple.
Okay.
And a lot of this obviously speaks so much to what we've already talked about. When you give in and start eating a food you were craving, you often find yourself eating more than you intended to.
Yeah.
And then another one is when you eat a food you're craving, you sometimes eat to the point of feeling excessively stuffed. I'm like, nope, not me.
Gee,
never on that one.
Never feel, as I call it, beached. Yeah.
A beach. I really prescribe to the 80% rule, Kate. I always stop when I'm 80% full. I'm so tired of hearing that from people.
It's interesting. That first question is interesting because I think if I'm eating crappy food, I don't have much of an intention about how much I am going to eat. I rarely set an intention. That would probably be a good idea, wouldn't it? If I actually were like, but I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't understand how people eat one piece of pizza. I don't get that. Like, I just can't eat one piece. That's not totally satisfying. And that is, in fact, a meal.
Totally. I think I'm making progress because when I went and got a pizza last week, I didn't get the large. I got the small.
That is progress. We talked about that in the last podcast. That's so good. Totally. Yay.
Thank you. And it's sad to eat the small pizza and you're like, oh, I want more. It's so absurd.
No, isn't that crazy? I know. So setting an intention for how much of it I'll eat. Good idea.
There's this other question that says, you often hide your consumption of unhealthy food from others, which I don't really do. But it did make me think about when I first started hiding food. I started hiding food when I was 13. I remember having to slip out of my room down the hallway to the pantry closet, and my parents would be in the living room watching TV. And I remember very specifically trying to open that pantry door real quiet like. And then I'd always remember there'd be like little bags of Doritos in there, and I would try and steal 2 or 3 bags of Doritos ever so quietly, because you know how quiet Dorito bags are. And then I would I'd sneak back down the hallway, perfectly assured that no one heard a thing.
I used to sneak food too, back in probably around that same age was when it started. And like very rarely we would have cookies in the house, homemade stuff. We never had Doritos. We never had store-bought stuff. Again, my dad was one of those guys who made me eat natural peanut butter on whole wheat bread with nothing, which I like now, but at the time it was just dry and gross in the 80s or whatever it was. And so we had that kind of stuff in the house, but occasionally we would make cookies or have some kind of treat. And I would, sneak one, and then a little later I'd sneak another one. one. And I was what was called, I guess, a latchkey kid at the time. I would come home after school and have a lot of time by myself. And so I would sneak one. And then a couple hours later, I'd maybe have another one. And then what I didn't realize was that by 2 days from then, by the time he opened the container, it was halfway empty when he knew it was full. But to me, it was like a little
what happened? Where did it all go?
Where'd those cookies go? Because for me, it was like, well,
and you're just
he's not going to notice one. He's not going to notice one more. But of course, from when he looked, it was like 20.
Totally. And then you're just standing in the corner of the room with your hands up in the air. You're like, not me, not me.
Right. And of course, it was just me and him in the house. So, there was very, very limited recourse.
Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here.
I don't know. Someone must have broken in and taken those cookies.
Dad, someone's stealing our food. Which leads to my favorite question on a lot of this questions on a lot of the quizzes. Have you ever stolen other people's food? Which, I have, but in the way that, like, if you're living with someone and they have some leftover Thai food in the kitchen, in the refrigerator that's been there for more than a day, I'm like, if it's there more than a day, I think it's open season.
Well, you're really just saving them from getting food poisoning, from eating food that's been sitting there too long. Like, it's really noble. You're throwing yourself on the sword there, Rick.
Thank you. Why can't other people see me the way you do?
I don't know, honey. That's funny, because I was just thinking, I was trying to imagine a context in which because my answer is no. I was trying to imagine a context in which I would steal someone else's food. But of course, that is one. I live alone, so that didn't occur to me. But no. And when I have been
if you do start stealing food from yourself, Kate, we'll have a real problem.
Seriously, I'm not going to tell you about it if that happens. But seriously, like, if I've had, sharing situations, it's never been stealing. We've had an open relationship when it comes to food, like, take what you want and take what you want of mine. So I would have to say, for me, I haven't had occasion to steal someone else's food, but I wouldn't say it's impossible.
Right. There's always room for growth. Here's one that I love. Do you eat differently in private than you do in front of other people? Unequivocally, yes, for me. My other favorite one was, do you think about food or your weight constantly? I sort of do, and I can't think about that question too much, because it's hard enough to think about my food and weight constantly, much less thinking about this question. Because when I think about this question, it makes me think how much brain energy has literally been sucked out of me over the last 35 years.
Well, I think that's a fascinating question, and I'm going to maybe give what might be a surprising response to that, which is that when I'm eating well, I think about food a lot more than when I'm not eating well. It's the opposite of what I would have anticipated. And the reason for that, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, yeah, we've talked about this before, where we're actually the opposite.
Yeah.
So when I'm eating well, I don't think about food very often.
Totally. And for me, the reason is because when I am eating well for me requires a tremendous amount of energy and planning. Because for me to eat well, I have to have really healthy, satisfying, delicious, tasty, nutritious food ready at my fingertips. That's what has to happen.
Right.
And that doesn't just magically happen. So for me to have it, I have to plan what I want to make. I have to shop for it. I have to cook it. I have to portion it out. I have to freeze it. And I literally think ahead about what I'm going to eat tomorrow. What are the meals I'm going to have and snacks? Like what are the 5 foods available to me in my fridge tomorrow, of which I can choose 3 or 4 depending on how the day goes. I really spend most of my time thinking about food. And part of the problem is when I don't do that, that's when I order. And as we've discussed, as we know, like, that's my bugaboo. My downfall is that I order food in, which is absurd on so many levels. I don't even want to talk about it. But so it's because I don't have anything. I don't have anything in the house. I don't have anything ready. And by the time I could, So that's an interesting question. I think about it more when I'm doing healthily. Now, I didn't used to think about my weight very much until I lost it and regained some. And now I think about it all the time, and it bums me out. So that's another thing that's interesting.
Hey, Kate, what are you into these days?
I'm into roasting vegetables. Pretty much anything I like is good roasted, but I'm especially a fan of beets, sweet potato, cauliflower, and green beans.
How perfectly fallish of you.
It is fallish.
I thought I'd leave us with one of the other things that I thought this is sort of amusing. So I was reading this article where basically all of these major sort of corporate people are in the same room. All these people that run like Kraft, Nabisco, General Mills, Procter & Gamble that make all this junk food. And in this meeting, they're arguing about what they call stomach share. And stomach share is the amount of digestive space that any one company's brand can grab from the other competition.
Oh my God. It's like market share, but about food.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Like, we're going to get more of the stomach share.
Dude.
And on that, my children, go forward and prosper.
Right. Although,
Good
wait,
luck.
we need to come up with a call to action. We haven't thought about that. What is our call to action for this week?
Yeah.
For this episode?
Well, any ideas on your end?
Well, I always come up with awareness. That's always mine. That always makes the most sense in the moment. Like, just pay attention to what you're doing. But that just feels lame. And I've said that enough times that I don't want to say that again now.
Totally. And the question is, with awareness is great, but then what are you going to do with the awareness? What's the action plan?
But still, I feel like I have to
is what I think about.
Yeah, but I still haven't gotten the first part yet. Like, I don't have to worry about that until I have the awareness, it seems to me. Like, until I pay attention,
Right.
Once I get the awareness, it's sort of like gathering data for research. Like, you gather data for research and then you analyze it and figure out what it means. So to me, and also awareness always precedes change. This is something I use all the time in my teaching and coaching. You have to be aware of a behavior before you can change it. And I think so much of an addictive and this kind of behavior is non-conscious. I think I tune out and I'm not really in myself. I'm not really in my spiritual and psychic and mental and emotional and physical bodies. I am somewhere else. I'm in the mac and cheese or whatever. So I think to me, just actually being present, because I think if I was present with what I was eating, first of all, I would stop after it no longer became pleasurable. I think that's what would happen.
Agreed.
So I take it back. I am going to go with that again. I'm going to go with that again. It's like, if I'm eating something that's not good for me, really pay attention to how much I'm enjoying it. And when I stop enjoying it, stop eating it. That's a good one. That's it. When I stop enjoying it, stop eating it.
I love that. I think that's a great one too.
Isn't that good?
Because really, what'd you say?
I said, isn't that good? I just got all excited about it. Yeah.
It is really good. I like it a lot because it's this whole idea of like, you're right. Awareness is important. And then you have to learn to like, in that moment, how do you shift it? Totally. I think it's great.
Because ultimately, this is about portion control, really. Like, I am not suggesting that anybody ever stops eating all these bad things. It's just to do it in very small doses when you eat something, quote,
Agreed.
bad, right? So, and that's, I think this is what, I hear tell, Rick, of people who don't have weight problems. I've heard that those people exist who have a healthy relationship with food.
Where do they live?
In Narnia. But anyway, they have some kind of healthy relationship with food. And I've been out with these people and I watch them eat 5 bites of something delicious and then be done with it because they're just done with it. So I think that's the key. So when it stops being pleasurable, we stop eating it.
When you say that, it makes me think something I've always really wanted to put into practice, but I never have, which is particularly when I'm eating out, is to never finish everything. Always feel free to either make sure I bring something home or just send it away and be done.
Yeah.
And not finish the entire meal. Like, that's really hard for me because I was always raised to clearing everything off of my plate.
Yeah.
But I like that idea a lot because you're right. At the end of the day, it just has to stop because I'm never going to be anyone that cuts any of this stuff out. Never.
No,
You know
nor
what
do I
just
want
like
to
it too
be.
much.
That's not my goal.
Yeah.
My goal is to have a healthy relationship with it and have the bad stuff in moderation and focus on the good stuff. So our call to action is for you to join us in our new mantra. When I stop enjoying it, stop eating it.
Also, visit our website for recipes, ideas, links, resources, and follow our conversation on our Facebook page. Send us ideas. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Our podcast is made possible by generous donations from listeners like you. Please visit patreon.com/you-won't-believe-what-I-ate to contribute.
Okay, well, not so much our sponsor, but Kate using an accent.
Hey, what?
Make sure to come back for our next episode where we'll start looking at fad diets and we'll throw in another little treat as well.